Okay, well, hello, guys. Tonight, hi, Tia. I wish you were here. Let me open in prayer. Lord, we thank you, Father, for your truth and your righteousness. We thank you that we can look into your word tonight. We pray for those who are not with us, that you will make them well in both spirit and in flesh. In your precious glory. Amen. Okay, so we're going to actually look at um, Ezekiel. Now, Gene, have you ever done any studying in Ezekiel?
I believe it one time.
Oh, one time. And Pete, not much. Okay. Well, now Ezekiel's an interesting book because Ezekiel is all prophetic. And so Ezekiel, as a prophet, is called the Son of Man, a name that our English translations translate from the Masoretic text for the Jesus, Son of Man. We talked about how those Masoretic texts are translated about 1,000 years after Jesus walked the earth. And so I believe, just my belief, that those who translated the Hebrew who from the Septuagint or whatever text they used, they added the vowel marks, they changed Jesus' words, which were the son of a virgin, to son of a man. And what evidence do I have for that? Just the evidence of the Hebrew manuscripts that have been found in the last few hundred years. And those manuscripts, some of them, which are later, do say son of man, but many of them, and as you recall in our book, they say son of a virgin, which lines up, in my opinion, to the truth. For when Jesus said, I am a son of a virgin, he was telling the truth. But if he did say it, he was saying son of a man. He is not telling the truth. And the only reason he could say that is he was trying to make a symbolic connection to Ezekiel, who wrote his book, and God said to him, Son of man, write this. Son of man, write this. And so there are many that say, well, that Jesus was making that connection to Ezekiel as the Son of Man. I do not buy it. I prayed on it greatly, and I believe the Hebrew copies of the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, the copy of John we have does say son of a virgin and son of a man. But I believe the truth when they were written was son of a virgin is what Jesus called himself. But whether that's true or not, Jesus' words are true, and so is Yahweh's words are true. And in Ezekiel, that book, he talks much about the end of days. Now, because it's all prophetic, the challenge when reading Ezekiel is, when is this prophecy going to be fulfilled that Ezekiel was told by Yohevah, by our Father, who talked directly to him. And he says, Son of man, write this. And in the book, he says that quite often. And some of those events have all been fulfilled. But some of those events have not been fulfilled. How many of you have heard of the Ezekiel War? Ezekiel 38 and 39, the big wars have come. Okay, so that war has not happened yet. There is discussion that war will happen in these end of days, the end of the sixth day, the 6,000 years in the soon near future. And many people are prophesying that or speculating that, and they have lots of videos on it. I heard one guy today say, yep, we're getting ready for the Ezekiel War. And that is Monkey Works, if you're familiar with Monkey Works. Okay, so he was saying, yep, it looks like the Ezekiel war is going because this is happening. And that's very plausible that war, as recorded in Ezekiel 38, will happen soon. But there's another option, and most prophecy experts, or at least most that I heard, they don't appear to understand this, is that at the end of the seventh day, the millennium, when our Lord and King sets up his kingdom in Jerusalem and we rule and reign with him, that at the end or close to the end of the seventh day, that 1,000 years, the Father releases Satan to deceive the nations again. And there is a massive war that happens. And it's possible that is one of the events that Ezekiel is told. So when we look at Ezekiel's book, we have to understand the difference between the Asian or the Eastern philosophy and how the Easterns see their worldview and our Westerns see the worldview. So before we get into that, we're going to review that real quickly. Now, we're going to talk about philosophy. And Gene, have you ever had a philosophy class?
No.
Pete, never? Yeah. Yeah, philosophy. Me either. I didn't even know how to spell the word until a couple years ago. Okay, so their philosophy is difficult for me to explain, but let me help you understand the best I can. Philosophy has, are you guys okay with the temperature in here?
Right now, yeah.
Cold or too warm?
Just turn it off.
Okay. So philosophy has a lot to do with our worldview. Our worldview being that, but it's more than the worldview. So we got the Eastern philosophy and a Western philosophy, and nations that would fit under Eastern philosophy would be all of Asia, Japan, China, the Hebrews, Saudi Arabia, almost all the Islamic countries. And then we have the Western philosophy. And the Western philosophy originated from the Greeks around 600 years. Now, the oldest philosophy is the Eastern philosophy. When God created the earth and then populated it, the only philosophy we had at that time was the Eastern philosophy. So when we look at writings that go back prior to Europe being developing its philosophy, we see that those writings follow the Eastern philosophy. Now, since that time, since the 6,000 years of development, and in the last couple thousand years, most nations have gone from an Eastern philosophy to a Western philosophy. And the differences we're going to kind of touch on tonight, and we've touched on a little bit before, but it's important that we understand some distinctions between Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy if we accurately want to interpret the Bible.
The Western is a modern philosophy.
It's more modern, yep. Mm-hmm. And the differences, or some of the differences, we're going to kind of look at. We're going to kind of look at a couple of differences. Now, I think I've told you I've been studying not only Hebrew, but I have recently started studying Paleo, I'm not sure, Hebrew. Now, Paleo Hebrew is an older language. And it probably goes back to the time of Nimrod and possibly even before the flood. And it's an Eastern language. And when we see the differences in the Eastern and Western language, we can more easily understand how easy it was to communicate. In basics, Eastern philosophy uses pictures. Pictures. How do you spell pictures?
P-I-C-T-U-R-E-S.
U-R-E. Picture. Oh, thank you. Pictures. And Western uses letters. Now, when I say this, this is a generic term because these pictures also work as letters. But our letters, our alphabet, maybe that would be closer, alphabet, they don't have pictures in them. If I say B, what picture do you interpret? Just a B, yeah, B or C or D. All we get for a picture is, there's a B, a C, a D, and the only picture they generate is the letter. But in the Eastern philosophy, in the Eastern languages, and this would be languages, every letter is a picture, and that picture represents something. This is a rough copy of the Aleph, what we call A. Now, you'll see it better drawn, and I'm not very good at drawing these, so that's about all I'm going to use for right now. But the Aleph, when you see it, means in its very root, chief, king, God. And so if you want to say, I'm chief, you would just say, like this. I, chief. You see the chief. Okay? And Paleo uses these letters, I'm going to call them letters. I'm sure there's a theological or a correct interpretation, which we'll kind of look at so we can get it, to make a picture. So when we look at Yod He Vav He, the Father, and we see it in the original Paleo Hebrew language, we see pictures. And the reason they have pictures and we have letters has something or mostly to do with our philosophies of life, how we differ in the way we see things and the way we communicate. In the Eastern philosophy, they communicate in, we've talked about this, concrete and abstract. And we, the Western, is what we call abstract. And now I'm going to help you understand what we mean when we say abstract. And the Eastern means concrete. They communicate in the concrete, we communicate in our abstract. Now, the first thing you think, you can say, well, wait a minute, we're concrete, A, B, C, D, right? But to understand what abstract and concrete means, abstract means we communicate in something that you cannot feel, touch, see, smell, or hear. There are no senses involved with it. So when I say, I'm feeling really good today, okay, well, what does really mean? Can you make a picture out of really? No. Can you make a picture out of good? No, we're using abstract. We're using words that we have to understand what that word means before we can understand the word. The Eastern language uses concrete. They would say, and this is where I'm going to stumble over this, and it'll take me a while to get through this, but where they would say, I like the breeze over the grass near deep waters. Now, what they're saying is they're giving you a picture. But you see what they're using? They're using concrete components. They're using grass, water, things you can see or feel. So when they talk and they say they're concrete, they're talking or writing. They're writing. We're not talking. Take that back. They're writing in concrete pictures that someone could taste, touch, feel, or hear. And they know what those taste, touch, feel, and hear is because they live in them. And so hence, they can interpret your words by the concreteness of using your senses. In the abstract, we don't talk that way. We talk in words that we can't see or hear or feel or touch. Does that make sense? I'll give you a good example. And this is used in many places. This is a time chart, history of world time. And when we study the Bible, or we read something, or we're writing something, we have a tendency to put it down in time order, in a timeline. I would write Gene and say, Gene, we missed you last Tuesday. We started off in prayer. We studied Hebrews. And so I would go through the different things we did. It's pretty symbolic with the timeline, and you would understand what we did. But the Hebrews, Eastern philosophy, the Asians would not do it that way. They don't use the same understanding of time. To us, time is a line. To them, time is circular. There's no beginning, no end. It's always just moving. And there have been those that say, well, that's the exact same way that the Father, here, let me help you up. Come on. Put your feet up. Oh, you got it. Good. Okay, so that's the same thing, and we can see it in the Bible. People say, well, Father's above time. He doesn't have a timeline. He sees the end, sees the beginning. Well, it's because he's circular. And this was the original understanding. Now we're going to look at some snapshots I took from my class. And I'm just going to read what Jeff Brenner says, because he knows it so much more, and I'm just starting to grasp it. Jeff A. Brenner, the Torah Mechanical Translation, like you've heard me talk about it. And we're going to kind of look at what he has to say. Any questions about what I've talked about yet? Okay, so here we go. Now, it's the philosophy of the Hebrew language. But this philosophy used to be, and still is in some part, with all Eastern cultures. But the authors of our Bibles, when they wrote in Hebrew, and even in the New Testament, this philosophy was their prevalent philosophy. So Pete said earlier when I says, hey, have you ever studied Ezekiel? And he says, no, I haven't. It can be hard to understand. And that's because of the philosophy they use to write. And if we don't understand their philosophy, we never can grasp what they're trying to say. And once we understand a few basics, all of a sudden, some things in the Bible start popping out, and we can say, wait a minute, I have to think of that through an Eastern philosophy, and when I do that, I can start to see it more clearly. And that's true Old Testament and New Testament. Now, our New Testament was translated into Greek. And there are some that will say that most of the New Testament books were written in Greek. But modern scholars will tell you that's not true anymore. Most scholars from the best Bible schools will say, yeah, we found too many documents, Old Testament manuscripts or New Testament manuscripts, that were written in Hebrew that are dated prior to our Greek. So I'm not going to say that every New Testament book was written in Hebrew. Some of them may have been written in Greek, but we're finding that many of them were written in Hebrew, and whether they were written in Hebrew or Greek, the philosophy of those who wrote them was Eastern. So they wrote it in such a way. In that translation, if it was translated from Hebrew to Greek, the Greek thinkers who made the translation had to be able to understand the Hebrew mindset and what they were what they were saying, and move it into Greek, which is more of a abstract language. Now, some places they've done a very, very good job of doing that. For instance, when we look at a Hebrew word, let's take love, for instance. We've got one word, love, in the Hebrew language, but it can be written different ways. In the Greek, we've got 4 or 5 more ways to say it, the same word. And the reason is because in the Hebrew, the word love, depending upon how you write it, can mean different things. So the translators, when they translated Hebrew to Greek, recognized that, and hence the Greeks have more than one word. And by their culture, they have more than one word for a word that the Hebrews would only know for a single word. Now, Hebrew language, and when we're talking about languages, we're going to talk about Hebrew. Aramaic is a lot like Hebrew. So the Arab language, Aramaic, and Hebrew share a lot of similarities. Their beginnings were the same. It's very possible that when the Father first provided writing, in whichever way he did, there was only one language. It was either Aramaic or Hebrew, but it was a pictograph. And when we go back far enough and we look at what we find in writings that go back thousands of years, they're pictographs. Aramaic, Hebrew, there are what they call Semitic languages. Semitic languages. Okay, so going back there, we're not going to worry about all those languages. We're going to address now our main language that we're studying, which is going to be Hebrew, right? It's Hebrew that we're interested in as a language and its translation into Greek. So, let's go ahead and take a look at this document, the philosophy of the Hebrew language, East and West. There were 2 ancient philosophers that fall into these 2 different camps. Plato, Greek; Confucius, Asian, Orient. Right, okay? Abstract, concrete. Pardon? No. Asian is concrete. American Greek is abstract. Okay, remember what our definition is to be concrete, you have to be able to feel the language. So you speak in things you can feel. A good example of that would be the Song of Solomon. It's about a love between the Father and the church. And for people to understand that, they use concrete themes. And the concrete themes are a man and a young woman. And as they talk, and some will say, matter of fact, it's probably one of the least studied books in the Bible because most people don't know how to understand it. They would say, well, they don't understand it. But as you look at it, you will see that the descriptions of the man and his young bride are concrete. The man, they say, the man is like an oak on the shore of the Lake Niron or whatever it says. Now, you would say in the Greek thinking, you go, what does it mean when he says he's like an oak on that shore? That means he's muscular? See, they're using words that would imply not that he's muscular, that's what we would think in the Greek thinking, but that picture, they can touch it, feel it, taste it. And what is an oak when it's next to the water and it's growing? It's strong. It's like a rock. You can't move it. It's hard wood. It stands up between all the storms. See, that's the picture that is printed in the mind of the Asians in their language. Does that make sense? Okay, so we'll flush this out a little bit more and more. Okay, so I'm going to read. Throughout the world, past and present, there are two major divisions of thought or philosophy. So philosophy, two major divisions of thought, of thinking, Western and Eastern. Western philosophy has its beginnings in the 6th century BC in Greece. Okay, so this is 6th century BC. That's 600 years before Jesus. That's 3,400 years after creation. So up to that point, everything in the world was Eastern philosophy. But the Greeks have conquered the world. The Greek mentalities, the Greek thoughts, even in Japan, even in China, in South Korea, even in those areas, because of the influx of Western culture, culture has changed thinking. Okay? So it started, Western philosophy started 6th century BC in Greece with such philosophers as Socrates or whatever. How do you say it? Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Eastern philosophy has its roots. Aristotle. Thank you. See, you guys are good. Okay. Philosophy has its roots. Eastern philosophy has its roots in the ancient past and was the philosophy of all ancient cultures of the Far East, including China and Japan. Middle East, including India and Babylon. Near East, including Egypt and Israel. As the Greek culture spread, so did Western philosophy, to the point that Western philosophy has become the predominant philosophy throughout the world. So most of the world predominantly sees things through the Eastern philosophy, through Eastern philosophy. Eastern. Well, now they see it as Western. Yeah, right. Thank you. Thanks for fixing me. Do Western. Okay.
You know what's interesting is if you've ever been around anybody who writes Japanese, every letter is a picture. Everything is a picture. And that's how they speak it. They show pictures. I don't understand.
Right. Right. Because they still, in their base culture, have an Eastern philosophy. And each one of those pictures means something. You put this picture and this picture together, and that means something else. But if you move this picture in front of that, that means something else. Yeah. Roots. Right. Exactly. Okay, so you kind of get the feel of that. Okay, so here he goes. The Hebrews of the Bible wrote the Bible from the perspective of Eastern philosophy, both Old and New Testament. But because the Greeks have translated the writings of the Hebrews, even in the New Testament, I believe, they have transferred a lot of the understanding to Western philosophy. Okay? And it's necessary when you're translating the Bible into English, because English readers do not understand Eastern philosophy. Like you said, they could write all those pictographs, but you don't understand what it means. Then it is necessary that the translators have not been able to fully give us the understanding that the writers had intended for us to understand. Now, they've done as good job as possible within the constraints of our abstract thinking and the way we work, but it will never fully grasp the author's intent. Hence the reason we try to put ourselves into the mindset of the original authors so that we can see what they write in their original writings more clearly. And it isn't as hard as you might think. And we'll be practicing a little bit of that as we go on tonight. The Hebrews of the Bible wrote the Bible from the perspective of Eastern philosophy, but today's readers are interpreting these writings with Western philosophy. This is the problem. When we look at the Bible and it was written with an Eastern philosophy, and then we try to interpret it with Western philosophy, we get lost. That's why we study Greek and Hebrew. That's why teachers of the Bible study the original languages so much so that they can grasp the in-depth understanding of that language. Now, fortunately, the Holy Spirit helps us do that when we make the effort. But today's readers are interpreting these writings with Western philosophy, the results being misrepresentations and mistranslations of the text. For this reason, it is essential that we learn the philosophy of the ancient Hebrews in order to better understand the text we are reading. The language of the Hebrews is a concrete language, and here is his definition, meaning that it uses words that express something that can be seen, touched, smelled, tasted, or heard. And all 5 of the senses are used when speaking. That is concrete because you can see it, you can touch it, you can smell it, you can taste it, or you can hear it. So when they would say, like, the man spoke to his wife like the brook babbling over a steep waterfall. Well, they know what a brook babbling over a steep waterfall is. It's fast, it's intense, it's difficult to understand, it's too fast. And so that makes a picture different than we would understand. Because we would say, well, does that mean that he was noisy, or what does that mean? Yeah, he's just babbling, right? Okay, so you can see we can translate that, but they would see more depth in that because they would see the volume of the water, the height of the water, and they would be able to put their senses around it, hence being concrete. And all 5 of the senses are used when speaking: hearing, writing, and reading the Hebrew language. All 5 of the senses when we read, write, hear, or speak the Hebrew language. Does that make sense? Okay. An example of this can be found in Psalm 1:3. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Okay, so what is that saying?
Well, you got a tree by water, so it's going to be healthily nourished, and so which means that it's going to grow good fruit in the seasons, and that because of all the water, the leaves will be healthy and
Yeah, it doesn't get sick. He's always strong there. He's by the water. He's got everything he needs to grow. So you can see how much more is in the pictures. Okay. In contrast to the Eastern philosophy of a concrete language, Western philosophy uses an abstract language to express itself. An abstract word is an expression that cannot be seen, touched, smelled, tasted, or heard. That's the difference. Abstract means that you can't use the senses, our senses. A concrete language means our senses are used. Examples of abstract thought can be found in Psalms 103:8. The Lord, Yahweh, is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. See, there are no senses there that we can taste, smell, see, or hear. These are abstract words, abounding, slow. Now, how would a Hebrew say slow? Maybe like he moves like,
The leaves falling in summer.
okay, or maybe like ice. He is like the waters from the snows falling. See, now you can see those waters are starting to come out of the snow in the abstract. So you're using your senses. Now, this is going to be hard for us to kind of fit on, but our goal is that we can start to see some of these abstracts and put these abstracts into words. Examples of abstract are in 10:3. The Lord is compassionate. That's an abstract word. Gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. The words compassion, grace, anger, and love are all abstract words. Ideas that cannot be experienced by the senses. That's the difference. Concrete words can be experienced by the senses. Abstract cannot. Why do we find these abstract words in a passage of concrete thinking? Actually, these are abstract English words used to translate the original Hebrew concrete words. The translators often translate this way because the original Hebrew makes no sense when literally translated for Western thinkers. So translators have to involve themselves in understanding the native languages and what the concrete words were intended for them to understand, translate those into abstract words, and then write them. You see how that works? That makes sense to you, Pete? Okay. Now, that was just talking about the languages. Now we're going to look at concrete and abstract thought. While there are many differences between the Western and Eastern schools of thought, one of the major differences is the use of abstracts and concretes. Concrete left and abstract right. So you see concrete on the left, what do you see? Yeah, a couple of boats on the water. But here's an abstract. What do you see? Yeah, and that's what we see in paintings, right? But that abstract art is just not defined. Just like if you say you're magnificent. If you don't know what magnificent means, I can't define that word. But if you say you are like our God who gives us our food, well, that's magnificent. So you were using concrete. Okay, so concrete is left and abstract is right. Just as artwork may be created in the concrete or the abstract, words can also be created in the concrete or the abstract. They're not exclusive. In fact, that's what the writers did with the original translations. They took the concrete words of the Hebrews, translated them into abstract words, and created the English New Testament. Okay. Or the English Old Testament. As the Bible was written from an Eastern philosophical perspective, it is important that we recognize that we cannot interpret it through our own Western philosophy. And that's where we fail because we know no other way. Grab my Bible, start reading it, particularly the Old Testament, it can be very difficult. Even though the translators have translated it into abstract for us, the translators cannot fully translate into the abstract what was concrete, and vice versa. We cannot interpret it through our own Western philosophy. To do so would place a meaning and interpretation that may not be that of the original authors. Thorleif Bowman's monumental work, Hebrew Thought Compared with Greek, states, the thinking of the Old Testament is primitive and hence can be compared only with the thinking of other primitive people, and not with thinking as advanced as Plato or Bergson's. Victor H. Matthews explains how the culture of the Hebrews can be studied in his book, Manners and Customs of the Bible. One of the joys of studying the Bible is attempting to reconstruct the manners and customs of the peoples of ancient times. The gulf of thousands of years can be bridged, at least in part, by insights into their everyday life. This is why I will often try to bring the everyday life into the scriptures. You know, I'll be reading and I'll try to paint a picture sometimes. These can be garnered through the close examination of the biblical narratives and through the use of comparative written and physical remains from the other ancient civilizations. In his book, The Hebrew Genius as Exhibited in the Old Testament, George Adam Smith said, the Hebrews were mainly a doing and feeling people. Thus, their language has few abstract terms. Rather, Hebrew may be called primarily a language of the senses. The words originally expressed concrete or material things and movements or actions which struck the senses or started the emotions. They understand by it striking their senses or their emotions. Only secondarily and in metaphor could they be used to denote abstract or metaphysical ideas. These same concrete concepts of Eastern thought can also be found in primitive cultures that exist today, who have not been influenced by our modern Western culture. The linguist Dan Everett presented during his Endangered Languages and Lost Knowledge seminar his discovery through his research that the primitive Paraha tribe in the Amazon did not use abstract perspectives, but instead concrete ones. As an example, the Paraha tribe call themselves the straight heads, and outsiders are crooked heads. See, their heads are straight because they communicate in concrete pictures and words. We communicate, the Greeks, the Western philosophy, in abstract. So they call us crooked heads because they cannot understand the abstract. Interestingly, the ancient Hebrew language uses the same style of speech. A literal translation of Proverbs 14 reads, "One who makes his walk straight will revere Yahweh, but the one who makes his path crooked is worthless." Everett also found that they had no concept of left or right, abstract terms of direction. I mean, my wife always goes like this: turn right, turn right.
Is that your other one?
As she's using her left hand. That's because she thinks like a Hebrew, right? That's an abstract term. She can't, and that's what we do. We would say go to the right, go to the left, or we would say go north, south, east, west. Those are abstract terms. You have to know what that term means. It does not describe the direction in the term. But instead, they gave direction in relation to the surrounding topography. That's the way my wife likes to give direction. She says, turn left at the stop sign. Turn right when you see the church. Many people still talk that way, don't they? And they would say they give directions by something that they can see.
Landmarks.
Pardon?
Landmarks.
Landmarks, yeah, because you could see it.
You gotta know where you are.
Yep, that's right. So it's a very effective method, as in, they would say, as in towards the river or turn towards the jungle. Again, this is strikingly similar to the ancient Hebrews' perspectives of direction. Exodus 38, 9 to 13 describes the direction of the court in relation to the four sides of the tabernacles. The Hebrew words used for these four directions are Negev, which means the desert region, which is south. Saphon, meaning the unknown region, north. Yam, meaning the Mediterranean Sea, west. Kedem, meaning the region of the rising sun, east. So you see the difference there. We would say east, west, north, south. They would say, oh yeah, turn towards the desert region. Or go towards the unknown region. That's north. We all know that. It's unknown area. Or turn to the Mediterranean Sea. Oh, we all know that. That's west. See, they would use those words. This is often called step logic versus block logic. While the modern Western person thinks and arranges events chronologically, we think of events chronologically. So we'd say, like I said earlier today, so what did we do? Well, first we got together and prayed, then, and I would think, what did we do first? Okay, and then what did we do after that? Okay, and then what did we do after that? All the way to the end. That's chronological. That's a timeline. While the modern Western thinks and arranges events chronologically, step logic, 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. The ancient Hebrews thought and arranged events according to action and purpose. And this is where we come into many mistakes in the Old Testament. We're going to see this as we look at Ezekiel. Because the events that are spoken of, when the Father says, Son of man, write this, he is giving him block logic. These are events that are together according to an action and a purpose, not a time frame. But what do we do when we start reading the Old Testament? We start looking for time frame. Okay, this is time frame. And I'll do this too. I'll say, but I'll look for, okay, I think this is the first time frame. Okay, now I see another time frame. Oh, and then another time frame. This could be 3 different prophecies. But they would say, well, these events all go together. This is the same action. Now, that action may have different timelines and usually does. And that's why when we look at the Old Testament, it's so difficult to determine the timelines. Because we're thinking timelines and they're writing in blocks of actions. Make sense? Difference between step logic and block logic. So who can tell me what step logic is? What?
Ducks in a row.
Yeah, ducks in a row. Progression. Very good. And what is block? What is block logic? And it is logic.
Action. They said it's according to action.
It's according to rating events, according to action and purpose. Okay, so block logic is, and this is the one that's going to be the hardest for us because we know this one, but this is it, and it's arranging the events according to action and purpose. Now, this is something we're going to try to keep more. So it's arranging events. That's it, events. According to action and purpose. Okay? Now, let me demonstrate with the following paragraph from a Western step logic perspective. I got up, ate breakfast, read the newspaper, see the progression. I then drove to work. While at work, I read yesterday's reports. At noon, I walked across the street for lunch. While there, I read a magazine. So here we go, step, progression. Now, let me rearrange this paragraph in block form, the way the Hebrews would have conveyed the same story. I drove to work and walked across the street, and I drove home. I ate breakfast, and I ate lunch, and I ate dinner. I read the newspaper, and I read the reports, and I read a magazine, and I read my emails. See, there is no correlation by steps, but correlation is by the action and the purpose. I drove to work, walked across the street, and drove home. Different time frames. Do you see the difference in the block? So they're putting it together by the actions and purpose. I ate. So I ate breakfast, I ate lunch, and I ate dinner. They don't put them in steps in between saying, well, between breakfast and lunch, I did this, which is what we would do. They put them in groups. Okay? That's very important to understand, particularly when we're looking at prophecy, because prophecy is grouped by action and purpose. And so why do we have such a difficult time of understanding prophecy? Because, we put it in steps, don't we? Instead of blocks.
Well, so then they use the word chronological. So when you buy a chronological Bible, someone has put that in their chronological order.
Right.
It's not necessarily going to be true.
Yeah, because everybody's still guessing on the timeline. But we're still thinking in the Western philosophy, aren't we? Yeah. And that's good because that's the way we work, right? It's the way we live. That is a philosophy of progression. See, when you think as an Eastern does, you don't think of conquering the world. Life is smaller. Life is closer. When you think in the Western philosophy, life progresses more and more and more. The West conquers the world. That's what's happened. But when God created us, when Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh created us, we had this understanding. Things were slower, calmed down. There was no progression of stepping further and further, and life was circular. And in the Hebrews who raised sheep, we raise the sheep here, we go here, we go here, and a year comes around, we end up right back here. Circular, everything's circular. In the West says, I own this property, I want to own that property, and then I want to own that property, That is the way of the kings of the world. That is the West. That is the philosophy of the West. Okay. To a person who is steeped in Western step logic, as we are, this paragraph would seem illogical, as there's no way to make any chronological sense out of the narrative. However, this narrative would make much more sense to a person who is steeped in block logic, as they can easily see my actions being grouped together. It is very important when reading the Bible to ignore the philosophy that has been ingrained in you and instead learn a completely new form of philosophy and logic. And for where we are now, this is what the Father wants us to learn. If we're going to get any deeper into His words, we need to understand His words from the mindset of the original writers. And so that's why we're covering this material. And we will talk henceforth every day we study the Bible more and more, helping us see this. Because as we understand the block concepts, we will start to understand the prophecies and the Old Testament considerably clear.
Are they still out of place?
What out of place?
Well, in the Old Testament,
Because when they were translated, did they change the chronograph?
yeah.
No, not in the Bible, because remember they're writings of letters, they're books. Yeah.
Okay, well, the books that wrong in the wrong places. They tell the same story in different places.
Well, the Bible isn't a chronological book as it's put together like this. It does have some chronology. Everything prior to Jesus is in the Old Testament. Everything Jesus goes to the New Testament. So we see a Greek chronology. But the Bible is put together more like the Hebrews. The first 5 are the law, the Torah. And then we have the prophets. So we're grouped. See, it's block. And then we have the major prophets, then the minor prophets. That doesn't mean that the minors were of less value than the majors. It means the major prophets were bigger books. The minor prophets were smaller books. So the Bible is actually arranged by Hebraic thought into blocks. Even the New Testament, we put Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all 4 Gospels together. Then we have Paul's writings. They're all together. Then we have John's writings. If we were to follow block logic, we would put 1st, 2nd, 3rd John right with the Gospel of John. But they've made that distinction. So you can see some of the Bible is actually put together under block logic. But then we take our Greek logic and we put page numbers on all of it so that we can understand it and find it.
I totally understand what you're saying, because we need to understand how to decipher what they're saying.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of times there's prefaces here that we read. It gives more understanding of the time and the period that they were in, but it doesn't break the words down. It just,
Yeah.
and then we go to the Greek, the Hebrew, the words, and
We try to find the understanding of those words.
The way they write it, you can give us 15 words and say, put these into a sentence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and we have to do that for Greek, right? I mean, these Hebrew words show pictures. They understand those pictures as fluid in their mind. We have to take those words and put them into a fluid sentence because we think abstract. So we add things like and they and different words to make the language work. Yeah. Well, we're taking the next step. Instead of trying to convert the language to the words to our understanding, we're going to try to understand the way they were originally written. Now, we'll stumble all over this, but you will find when we start to start looking at scripture in the Eastern philosophy and reminding ourselves of the Eastern philosophy, we'll start to see some deeper and more complete understandings.
You showed some of that when, even in the Hebrew book, where they show the picture, and yet in this Bible, it's two paragraphs where they've got one short
Yeah,
paragraph.
right. Because they're just translating a word that really needs 10 or 15 words to translate it fully.
To go for the Western understanding.
Right, for the Western understanding. So we're going to try to learn how to do that. It is very important when reading the Bible to ignore the philosophy that has been ingrained in us, and instead, and I wouldn't say ignore it, but to recognize it, and instead learn a completely new form of philosophy and logic when it comes to the Bible. Western readers of the Bible who are reading the Bible from a linear perspective read the creation account in Genesis as it was written in chronological order. But this was not how the narrative was written. The different events of the creation account are recorded in blocks of related events. That's why, have you ever heard somebody say, well, there's two different accounts of creation in Genesis? Which one is it? It's because they're blocks. In this block, here's creation. Some purpose was made in this block, and then there's another block of creation, and it's a different purpose in this block. So we have to be able to understand that. For example, the first 3 days of creation are related to separation, separating light from darkness, separating the water from the sky, separating the land from the water. All of them under the block are under that separation. The next 3 days of creation are related to the filling of the creation. Filling the light with the sun and the dark with the moon. Filling the water, fish, and the sky with birds. Filling the land with animals and man. So when we just say it that way, we can say, yeah, that's exactly what it does, but we never would have thought of it that way until it was brought to our attention that that's what the purpose of those events are. The record of events for the next 6 days of creation are written in blocks of parallels, a form of Hebrew poetry, and can be written like this: separating light from darkness, separating the water from the sky, separating the land from the water, filling the light with the sun and the dark with the moon, filling up the water with fish, the sky with birds, filling up the land with animals. Days 1 and 4 are paralleled with each other and are recorded the same event, as we can see from the following verses. And God saw that the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness. Genesis 1:4. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. That's 1:14a and 18b. Different blocks. And that's why people say, well, there's two different creation accounts there. See, they're thinking of it in Western culture. But the purpose was to show the different blocks of what happened in those. Now that we look at that, we can get a new understanding of days 1 to 2 to 3 isn't about creating light and darkness. It's about separating light from darkness. It's about separating the waters from the sky. It's about separating the land from the water. So we can get a different view of the purpose of Genesis 1 to 4. Verse 4 occurs on the first day and is describing the action of God separating light and darkness. But in verse 14, which is day 4, we have God again separating light and darkness. There are only two possible explanations for this. Either the separation of light and darkness on the first day disappeared and had to be separated again on the fourth day, or the first and fourth days are recording the same events. In addition, days 2 and 5 are recording the same event, as are days 3 and 6. See the difference? So we think, oh, day 1, Lord did this. What did he do the rest of the day? That couldn't have taken very long. And then day 2, he did this. Day 3, no. He did events of the first day and the fourth day are all the same events. He separated and he filled. Number 2 day and the 5th day, he separated and he filled. On the 3 and the 6th day, he separated and he filled. Hebrew descriptions, an oak tree and a ram. So here's an oak tree and here's a ram. So what do they have in common? Any ideas before we get too far?
They're strong.
They're strong. Very good. In our minds, we would never relate an oak tree to a ram or view them as the same. The reason being is that we relate to features and appearances. So we look at that tree. What do we see? We see a trunk and a big branch off one side, and a tree going up, and another branch off, and a bunch of leaves. That's the way we would explain it, right? The ram, what do we see? We see a animal with a white nose and 2 horns that are curled, and that's what we see. But they would not say that's what they see. What they would see, the reason being is that we relate to features and appearances. However, the Hebrews relate to the function and the purpose, remember? The function. And in the case of the oak and the ram, they function in the same way. An oak tree is a very hard wood, and the horns and skull of a ram are equally as hard. For this reason, the Hebrew word ayil is used for a ram, see Genesis 22:13, and an oak tree, because they would see very hard surfaces. Hard. They would see that. That's what they see. They would see that. Well, they don't say, I see a tree. Oh, I see hard, firm. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its breadth, 50 cubits. And its height, 30 cubits. From our modern Western mindset, we assume this passage is describing the appearance of the ark. But this is not so. The dimensions are not given to tell us what it looked like, but instead to tell us that it is very large and it is going to hold a large number of animals. Now, they'll talk about even more in here, and we're going to stop right here because I want to get into it. And there's static versus dynamic, Hebrew psychology, etc. And we'll look at more of this next time. But let's review what we have learned tonight. So what have we learned? How many philosophies are there? And what are they? East and West. And when did which philosophy was the original philosophy? Eastern. And when did the Western philosophy first start being prevalent? 600 BC, before Christ, approximately 6, according to Jeff A. Benner. Now, I have to give credit because everything that I've been teaching you is in my master's class. It doesn't come from me; it's coming from Jeff. And we're just reading it. I'm trying to help you understand it. But Jeff Benner gets credit for this material and for teaching us these components. Okay, so how would you describe Eastern philosophy in language?
Well, it's formed in pictures.
Pictures. They use pictures to describe things.
Events.
Yeah. And how would you, and what do we call that?
Concrete.
Concrete. Because why do we call it concrete?
It's firm, it doesn't change.
So it uses the senses to describe. Okay, so good. So what do we do in the Western philosophy? How do we describe in the Western philosophy?
We write letters and words using words.
And what do those words demonstrate?
Abstracts.
Abstract. Because there's no picture. You can't touch, feel, smell, hear that. Okay, very good. Okay, abstract. So you can see, and how many of you thought, well, we must be concrete and they must be abstract.
Never really thought about it that way.
I did. When I first saw that, I said, no, we think concrete, logic. But I didn't realize that's not what he's talking about.
We do think logic.
Yeah, but they think logically too. Okay, so there's two logics. The Western logic is a step logic. How would we define step logic?
Blocks.
No, step logic is
Progression.
Progression, stepping, progression. Yep. And what is the logic of Eastern philosophy, the Hebrew philosophy? That's the block. And how would we define block logic? Sorry about the writing. How would through action and purpose, right? Okay. So that's all we're going to go to tonight. I think that's a lot to gather in. And we'll review again as we continue in you take good notes. You take good notes. Yeah, you should. Should have been there. Yeah. Yeah, you tell her you're an abstract. Did you know that? Okay, so let's go to Ezekiel. Because
No, it kind of reminded me of what's the musical they've always done. I think the kids do. They got the what is it called? At Christmas time, take them down to Fifth Avenue, and they watch the performance of what's it called?
Nutcracker.
Yeah, the Nutcracker. So no, but I'm saying that they've got all these things, and you've got to understand what they represent.
Yep.
Each one of them.
They're pictures.
I could never
Yep.
figure it out.
Right.
Because I've never read, before that, I never read the book.
Eastern language.
I just went to the first time I just went there. My wife had read all the books and stuff. So
Right.
She knew what was going on.
Right. I never could. I'll tell you, the most painful time of my young life, I was in elementary school, was going to the Nutcracker. Oh, I had never seen anything in my life so boring. Nothing was as boring as the Nutcracker. I don't know, because I couldn't fall asleep as a kid, but it was terrible.
Oh, no, I took, Emily said, I have to work. Can you take me to the Nutcracker? Because I have these tickets. So my mom and I went, and I could barely keep my eyes. And I was like, and so somebody, Catherine, wants to take Lucy, and I go, have fun. Don't call me to go again, because I couldn't keep my eyes. You know how I am.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's really loud, I'll just go.
Well, and the reason is because, as you said, Dean, we don't understand it. If we don't understand it, it's just garbage in and garbage out. But your wife read the book, which was translated into abstract, and she was able to understand the events that went on in that. Yeah.
You know whose fault
No.
all this is?
You're right. You're probably right. Matter of fact,
Probably.
well, I cannot be adamant on that one because I haven't seen the words written down by my father. But
Well,
I would say you're probably pretty right.
If it wasn't for him, we'd all be talking.
Yeah, it's exactly right. We would still all have Eastern theology, right?
There wouldn't be any much.
Yeah. And who taught Nimrod this philosophy?
Don't tell me it was Enoch.
Fallen angels.
Oh,
Fallen angels. The fallen angels came. We learned about that in Enoch, right? The fallen angels and came and taught us how to war and paint women to paint their eyelids and all these things that man was not supposed to know. Okay, so and that in itself is a whole new and different study there. But we're going to just try to get a little bit of Ezekiel, and my goal is to wet your whistle on Ezekiel, not to teach the book. The book is massive, and I doubt I would ever be able to fully cover the book before our King comes. But if you understand, which is my goal, is to help you understand how to interpret the book of Ezekiel and the whole Bible from the Eastern mindset and to start seeing these blocks, these pictures, and looking for what these pictures mean, then you may find the book very interesting to study yourself. So, are either one of you guys reading through the Bible in a year?
Yeah.
You are.
Chronological.
I read
As you go.
not very far.
But you haven't done a through the Bible,
No,
and you're doing the chronological. Yeah, and I would recommend whether you use chronological or just ring it through a year for this one purpose. You're going to read books you would never ever look at, and they'll wet your whistle. And the Father, our teacher, the Holy Spirit, will start to show you things in those books that you didn't know they were there. And right. So if we are in the habit, and I admit I was very late to this. I only started this. I'm on my third year. I mean, it took me almost 50 years of walking with the Lord before I did it, or 40 years walking with the Lord before I did it. But it's been very, very valuable. Has it been valuable for you, Deb, reading through the Bible in a year? Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. And as you learn something somewhere else, then all of a sudden somewhere else learns, and then you see well, this is what I'm going to show you. Is tonight I'm going to show you some correlations I found in Ezekiel about the end of days. And I sent one out on Signal today. Did you guys see that? Okay, I sent on Signal. Let's see if I can show it to you. And and here's what I sent out. Okay. This was Ezekiel 13:18, and I will write. And you must say, now this is the Father saying to Son of Man, Ezekiel, and you must say, thus says Yahweh. Here it says, thus says the Lord Yahweh. Woe to those who sew magic charm bands on all the wrists of the hands of my people, and those who make the veils that are on the head of people of every height to ensnare people's lives. Will you ensnare the lives of my people and keep yourselves alive? Ezekiel 13:18. Well, when I read this today, and I just read this today because it popped up on one of my feeds or something, all of a sudden I could say, wait a minute, this is the mark. Is it? And that's what I say. Is it speak of the mark of the beast on the hand and forehead, who sew magic charms, bands on all the wrists? And if you look at Muslims, they'll put them on their wrists. They'll put their headbands on. You see the Jews. Now you got to remember, the Jewish followers in Jerusalem are not followers of Yehovah. They're followers of a form of Kabbalah, which is a blending of the Torah with Babylonian idols. It's a blending of idols. The Jews do not believe in the Old Testament as their primary source. They put two sources before it. Do you know what those sources are? They put before it let's see if I can find a copy of it. Any idea what they put is more important than the Torah? Jesus even spoke of it. The traditions of men. They have these books called, I can't even remember the names of them, but they're called I'm sorry, it just skips my head. But they place the Bible in the third ring. And the first one is the scribes and scholars talking about the Bible and interpreting the Bible and then writing it down. That is more important. And so what we see as Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem are not God's people. Now, are they of the heritage of God? They may be. They may even be from the tribe of Judah. They may be from the tribe of Levi. They may be from the tribe of Benjamin. But they're not God's people. And how do we know they're not God's people? Well, by their fruit. But who told us they're not? The Jew of all Jews, Pharisee of Pharisees, taught under Gamaliel, Paul, in the book of Romans. He tells us, not all that are Jews. Only those who are, what does he say? Let's, pardon? No. He says that are circumcised in their hearts. That is exactly right. So our heritage does not make you a Jew. Yes, you're of the Jewish nation. But Paul tells us in God's eyes, his people are those who have been circumcised in their hearts. And we're gonna look at that verse so we fully understand that. Because as we read, we have to understand who God says is his people. So we want to go to search. And the words that we're going to search for are circumcised hearts. Oops, that didn't work. Yeah, I'm having problems with this computer every day. It causes me problems. And we're going to look at Romans. I think it's Romans 8. Oh, it's Romans 2:28. So Romans 2:28. For no one, there we go, right there. Okay, now he's going to tell us this, and we have to understand this. This is critical as we study the Bible. So he says, and we're going to look. And he says, for as is written in verse starting with 24, for as is written, the name of God, the name of Yahweh, Yahweh, they say God, is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. For circumcision, he's talking to the Jews, indeed is of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcised. So all those Jews are breaking the law. And so they are, in God's eyes, uncircumcised. So if a man who is uncircumcised in his flesh keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? So he's saying, if you're uncircumcised, but you keep the law, you do what God tells you to do, in God's eyes, you're circumcised. Now he's going to cement that point. Then he who is physically uncircumcised, but keeps the law, will condemn you who have written the code. That's the Jews who have written the code and circumcision, but break the law. And now he's going to cement it. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. Circumcision is more than that. That's just the picture of what it means. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart by the Spirit, not by the letter of the law. That man's praise is not from man, but from God. So there he goes. He tells us who is a true Jew, and he'll even say that. That's what he's saying. One who has been circumcised the heart. So, who is the Jew? Who is the true Jew according to the Father? One that's been circumcised the heart. Well, what if he is from the nation of Israel? Is he a Jew according to the Father?
Could be.
Could be. Depends if his heart is circumcised, right? Okay. So now there is an error in teaching where some pastors will say, see, God took, some teachers will say this, there's a lot of them too. God took the promises given to the Jewish nation and gave it to the Gentiles because they worship Jesus. And it's called replacement theology. Have you heard of those words, replacement theology? It's very popular. In fact, it is the basis of the crust of one of the greatest deceptions in this world today. And one of the questions I asked the Father, is this the complete deception? And that deception is that if you are a follower of Jesus, you are saved. That's a lie. For the Father does indeed say, follow Jesus and his examples, but he is only the door. We must go through that door. He is not the designation. The Father is the designation. And Jesus said that. He said, no one gets to the Father unless they go through me. Yet Satan is very easily accepting that everyone can go to Jesus, and that's as far as you have to go. And I believe that may be the great deception we're in this world today. All you have to do is worship Jesus. But that's not what Jesus says. He says, I'm the door to get to the Father. So what Satan says, he's love and truth. Yes, we do got to get to Jesus. But we got to get through that door to get to the Father. It is he who is, Paul says, that is right with the Father. And we're right with the Father by doing what Jesus said. But that's not where we stop. And that's where so many churches are. You know, I mean, we've got to say it. It's all about Jesus, right? Well, that's leaven truth. Jesus is important, but he's the door to the Father. And if you don't please the Father, if you don't do what the Father says, you aren't going to be in his kingdom. I don't care what you think about Jesus. And that is a great deception, which may be the great deception that the scriptures are talking about. There may be more, but that may be it. And it's so big because almost everybody in the Christian church, yeah, we'll say that. That's it. It's the only thing that matters. Do you love Jesus? Yet, that's not it. That's really leavened. Not that we don't love Jesus, but he is the method to the Father. Okay, so here we go. So we're going to go back to Ezekiel. And as I told you on Ezekiel, on that signal, woe, thus says Yahweh, woe to those who sew magic, charm bands on the wrists of the hands of my people. Remember, the mark of the beast is they wear marks on the wrist or the forehead. Yes, dear. This is Ezekiel 13:18. Now, as we recall, we're gonna look at 14, but this is what I sent out today. In Revelation, John wrote, he who takes the mark of the beast, and he gives 3 different descriptions. That is the number on the hand or on the forehead. So it's on the hand or on the forehead. That's or. And either one of those worships the beast. So we have 2 religious entities that promote that. We have Islam, which has the number of Islam written on their heads. And John wrote in first, second, maybe third John, I can't remember, first and second or second and third John, he wrote, who is the Antichrist? He who denies the Father and the Son. So what he's showing us is the Antichrist is a spirit. This is a spiritual warfare. Remember, Paul told us spiritual. It's a spirit behind that is pushing his agenda onto this world. And they do those two things. They deny the Father and the Son. So we have Islam, who has a band on his head that says there's only one God and his name is Allah. They have a flag that says the Father has no Son. So they deny the Son and they deny the Father. Then we have the Jews, the Orthodox Jews, the Kabbalah Jews, those who are in the religious ruling of the Jews, who do not accept Jesus. They put on their heads and on their hands the scriptures, and they deny the Son. Now, do they deny the Father? I said, well, they never deny the Father. Yet, I am coming to learn they deny Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. Their God is the Babylonian God, the same God as Islam. So they call him Yahweh. But when you look at what they believe about him, what they say about him, what they write about him, that's not the Father. They're misrepresenting the Father. So, the mark may be nothing more, since we recognize concrete pictures, not chronological, not abstract, that when he says on the forehead and the hand, he's painting a picture of the mind and your actions and purpose. And the mark is those, as John says it, who worship not the Father or not the Son. And both those groups fit in that category. We see both those groups with the Roman Catholics, who, same thing, they deny the Father and they deny the Son in a more complicated way. Maybe someday we'll talk about that. And they're all joining together, converging together, worshiping the same God. And all of them have the spirit of the Antichrist. So it may not be as we've been thinking about, because we look at it from a Western step logic, abstract understanding, when we need to understand even Revelation by its actions and purposes in its blocks. Make sense? Okay, so we're going to go into Ezekiel. We're just going to look at Ezekiel. And we're going to look at 14. And here on 14, verse 6, can you see that writing? Do I need to make it bigger? I can make it bigger. So here, all of Ezekiel, his father, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, speaking to Ezekiel. Now, and here on 14, I'll start in 14. Then certain of the elders of Israel came to me and sat before me, and the word of Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, came to me. Son of man, these men have taken their idols into their hearts. Now he's talking about the elders, the priests of the Jews, and set the stumbling block of their iniquity before their faces. Should I indeed let myself be consulted by them? No. Therefore speak to them and say, thus says Yahweh, Lord God. Yahweh God. Any one of the house of Israel who takes his idols into his heart and sets the stumbling block of his iniquity before his face, and yet comes to the prophet, I, the Lord, will answer him as he comes with the multitude of his idols, that I may lay hold of the hearts of the house of Israel, who are all estranged from me through their idols. Now, you notice this word right here, stumbling block. That's in verse 4. Does yours translations use stumbling blocks?
Yeah.
It uses stumbling blocks. Does yours, Pete?
Yes.
Yours, Deb? Okay. So, what does that make you remember?
Something to trip over.
Something to trip over. And that's what the Father says. I will lay a stumbling block in Jerusalem. And Jesus is that stumbling block. Remember how we correlated him? He says he is the corner of the foundation. He is the cornerstone. That is the stumbling block. So here he's talking about and sets the stumbling block of his iniquity. Okay, now we're going to go down to 6. Therefore, say to the house of Israel, thus says Yahweh God, repent and turn away from your idols, and turn away your faces from all your abominations. So here's what he's saying. He says, you guys are worshiping idols. And those idols could be nothing more than what people are worshiping today. Life, possessions, love of the things, love of this world. That is what those idols could be. They may not be Baal, but they were probably Baal. They were probably those kind of idols. But today, people worship idols that are things. Verse 7, for any one of the house of Israel. Now, we need to understand, what's he mean with house of Israel? So house of Israel is not abstract, it's concrete. So when they say house of Israel, what they're saying is everybody who lives, now they're thinking from their house, they got a house, they got a tent, and in that tent, they got mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, children, everybody born into that family, it belongs to that house. So here, house of Israel, everyone who is born of Israel is in that house. So that would be the 12 tribes. Right? So that would be all the 12 tribes of Jacob. That's the house of Israel. So that's what they see when he says house of Israel. Thus says Yahweh, repent, turn from your idols, and turn away your faces from your abominations. For anyone of the house of Israel, now notice what else he says here. For anyone of the house of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel. Now, so when he says sojourn in Israel, my Greek thinking says what? What is Israel? Who sojourn in Israel. What is my Greek thinking say? What does sojourning in Israel mean?
Visiting.
Living in Israel?
Passing through.
Yeah, there's a Greek thinking, but that's not Eastern thinking. What is Israel? Israel is Jacob and his family and those who follow Jacob. It's the whole house. So the house or lives in Israel would be everyone who follows Israel, Jacob's faith. Paul talks about this. We see this in Hebrews. We see it where Paul, well, not Paul, whoever wrote Hebrews, says, who is saved? He who has the same faith as Abraham. Abraham wasn't saved because of the law. He believed God, and hence he was saved. These are concrete. So when he says house of Israel, it does not mean those who live in Israel. That's what we would think. It means those who follow Israel. Jacob is in his family. That includes us. And so here's what he says. So he says right here, for anyone of the house of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel. So we would say, well, in Israel would be the nation of Israel. He's just saying those who attach themselves to Israel, Jacob, not the nation, but to the promises that Father gave to Jacob, who became Israel, who sojourn in Israel. And if we look at that, verse 7 right here. We'll make this a little bit bigger. How do we make that bigger? There's where we make it bigger. Okay, so here we go. Sojourn in Israel. Here's how it goes. Remember, we read right to left. Thus, to say to the house Israel, thus says Yahweh, return from your idols, your detestable things, and all from your houses. For man of the house from Israel. You see that word from there? They added it. It isn't in there. Here they say in Israel. Here it says, right here, a man, the house of Israel, alien. So when we see sojourn in Israel, we think actually in the nation of Israel. But that's not what the Father's saying. He's saying who follows Israel and the promises of Israel. So who is that? For anyone in the house of Israel or of the strangers, that would include us, who sojourn in Israel, who separates himself from me, taking his idols into his heart. And what does it mean, taking his idols into his heart? Now, in this, we would say, taking his idols into his heart. I mean, obviously, I can't take. Well, let's just say my idol is I'm a radio broadcaster, and that's what I spend all my time in. So, do I take and put it in my heart? No. What does he mean when he says? We got to think of the concrete. We got to think of actions and purposes. What does he mean when he says, taking my idols into my heart?
Breathing.
Pardon?
Breathing.
Breathing. That's one possibility.
Living.
Living. Making it the most important thing. It is predominant in our heart. It means the most to me. So what is he saying? You're taking your idols, whatever idols you have, and you're making it the most important thing. Without your heart, you die. Instead of me being the most important thing, your idols are the most important thing. Okay? They're doing it by an action. They bow to their idols. They submit to their idols. They live according to their idols. Now, and putting a stumbling block of his iniquity before his face, and yet comes to a prophet to consult me through him. I, the Lord, will answer him myself, and I will set my face against that man. So what he's saying is, if you have any idols, here's the Old Testament, if you have any idols, and you take those as most important, then my face is against you. You are my enemy. You mean nothing. Even though you belong in Israel and you sojourn with Israel, you mean nothing. This is what Paul talked about in Romans, didn't he? He says, and Jesus said, who belongs to the Father? He who does the Father's will. So, and this is what the Father is saying right here. I don't care if you call yourself from Israel. I don't care if you sojourn. If you have an idol and you put it before me, I will disown you. I will set my face against that man. And I will cut him off from the midst of my people. Okay? And then he's talking about a prophet. Then he goes in and he says in verse 10, and they shall bear their punishment. The punishment of the prophet and the punishment of the inquirer shall be alike. So what he's saying is those who go to the prophet, and the prophet says something, even though he's not my prophet, and the man asks the prophet, and he's really not my son, because even though he's worshiping, he says he worships me, he has other idols. And this is the same scenario we see today. People go to churches, they say, oh yeah, I'm here worshiping God, and they only place God at the forefront of their life for an hour or 2 hours. Then they go away, and their life becomes their idol. They love their life, they love their flesh unto death. And that's what he's saying here. He's saying this 3,000 years ago. Same thing. And the house of Israel may no more go astray from me, nor defile themselves any more with all their transgressions, but that they may be my people, and I may be their God, declares Yahweh. And they shall bear their punishment. Why? So that the house will no longer go astray. What he's saying is all those who call themselves mine, whether they be prophet, preacher, or from the tribe of Israel, or from the church in the pews, if they have idols, they will bear their punishment. Why will they bear it? So that the house of Israel, the true house of Yahweh, may no more go astray from me. And that punishment is coming on the world. We read that in Revelation 7. That's where the punishment starts happening in Revelation 7. And why? So the house of Israel, those who really belong to Israel, may no longer go astray from me, nor defile themselves anymore with all their transgressions, but that they may be my people, and I will be their Yahweh, their God, declares the Lord Yahweh. Okay, and then he's going into Jerusalem. And the word of the Lord came to me, Ezekiel, son of man, when a land sins against me. Now he's talking about a land, a nation, a kingdom, USA, as one, sins against me by acting faithlessly. So they have no faith. That's all they're doing. There's no faith. And I stretch out my hand against it and break its supply of bread and send famine upon it and cut off from it man and beast. Even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, in that land, those three men in the nation of the USA, they would deliver only their own lives. So Noah, Daniel, and Job can't do anything to save anyone. They will only deliver their own lives by their righteousness, declares the Lord Yahweh. Notice he says here, if I cause wild beasts to pass through the land, and they ravage it, and it be made desolate, so that no one may pass through because of the beast, even if these three men were in it, he says the same thing. They alone would be delivered, but the land would be desolate. Or if I bring a sword upon the land and say, let a sword pass through the land, and I cut off from it man and beast, though these three men were in it, as I live, declares the Lord Yahweh, they would deliver neither sons, they would deliver neither daughters, but they alone would be delivered. Or if I send a pestilence into that land and pour out my wrath upon it with blood, to cut off from it man and beast, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, as I live, declares the Lord Yahweh, they would deliver neither son nor daughter. They would deliver but their own lives by their righteousness. For thus says Yahweh God, how much more, and he was talking about other nations, how much more when I send upon Jerusalem my 4 disastrous acts of judgment, the sword, the famine, wild beasts, and pestilence, to cut off from it man and beast, But behold, some survivors will be left in it, sons and daughters who will be brought out. Behold, when they come out to you and you see their ways and their deeds, you will be consoled for the disaster that I have brought upon Jerusalem, for all that I have brought upon it. They will console you when you see their ways and their deeds. And you shall know that I have not done without cause all that I have done in it, declares Yahweh God. So, what do you see in that?
Well, at the end, there are in the end saved.
Coming out of Israel, because he's talking about the end of Israel. Yeah, few will come. Now, you see any correlations with Revelation? Notice what he says right here. I stretch out my hand and break its supply of bread and send famine. That's the third or fourth seal. If I cause wild beasts to pass through the land, that's the fourth seal. Or if I bring a sword upon the land, the fourth seal. This is prophecy. The Father says, if I do this in another land, then Jerusalem also. So the Father is showing us. So let's look at Revelation 6. 6. And I heard something that voiced amidst 4 living creatures, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Do not damage the olive oil and wine. So here we see the rarity of food and the expensive cost. But olive oil and wine, which are foods of the rich, and that's what the Hebraic reader would see. Oh, the only ones that have olive oil, and we sell it so we can survive. It'll only have a lot of olive oil and wine. Those are those that will still be there. Those are the rich. And when he opened the 4th seal, I heard the 4th say, come, and behold, a pale green horse, and that seated on it was one named Death, and Hades followed after him. And authority was granted them over 1/4 of the earth to kill by the sword, by famine, by pestilence, and by the wild beasts. So here is that correlation from Ezekiel of what the Father says he's going to do, and he told Ezekiel, and we see in Revelation. And so we get a more fuller understanding of what the Father is doing. Any questions? Okay, I want you to notice something else. Who is saved from the no bread and famine? Who is saved from the beasts who make desolate? Who is saved when the sword passes through the land? Who is saved when he sends pestilence and wrath upon man and beast?
The ones who see their ways and their deeds will be consoled for the disaster that I have brought upon Jerusalem.
So who does he say on all those? Noah, Daniel, and Job are saved. Why Noah, Daniel, and Job? Because they were righteous men, right? Concrete. They know them. They're saved. No one else is. What does it say?
It says that
They're saved from the pestilence. Okay. They're saved from the sword.
Behold, 22. It says, behold, some survivors will be left in it, sons and daughters who will be brought out. Behold, and they will come out to you and see your ways and their deeds. You will be consoled for the disaster that I have brought upon you.
Okay, so where are those? Now remember, we're talking about blocks. The first block was what block? It was the nations, right? We switched blocks. Jerusalem. How much more when I send Jerusalem by 4? See, from what you just read, he's talking about Jerusalem. But if we go back up and we look at what he's talking about the nations, which is related to us, and he says, and the word Lord came to me, son of man, when a land sins against me. So this is about a land, not Jerusalem. Jerusalem is coming. So son of man, when a land sins against me, so think of it as all the nations. Let's think of it as U.S. When U.S. sins against me, we have done by acting faithlessly, and I stretch out my hand against it and break its supply of bread and send famine. These 3 men are saved. The righteous are saved. Noah, Daniel, and Job. If a wild beast pass through the land, same place, in the nations, the only ones saved are the righteous. Noah, Job. If I bring a sword upon the land, and the sword passed through, and I cut off from it man and beast, though there were 3 men in it, they cannot save the land, but all 3 of those men will be saved, and they cannot save their sons, their daughters, or anyone else. That's what he says in all of those. It says, I send pestilence, cut off the man beast. Noah, Daniel, and Job, the righteous are in it. They will deliver neither son nor daughter. They would deliver but their own lives by their righteousness. Verse 20. Then we get into Jerusalem. Thus says the Lord, verse 21, how much more, so he's using what he's talking about in the nations, how much more when I send upon Jerusalem my 4 disastrous acts of judgment. So he's showing all 4 of those disastrous acts of judgment to Jerusalem, and he's also doing it to the nations. And no one in those nations will be delivered because of who they belong to. See, they, in their households, remember they live in tents. Their families all live together. Maybe only one of the sons is righteous. The grandfathers are going to be lost. The children are going to be lost. So they're looking at it from that. Those are the blocks that he's showing in the nations. So the only ones that are saved during this time to come, Ezekiel, will be those who are righteous. Everyone else would be lost. That's what he's saying all the way. Then when he gets down to 21, he says, so much more by this example will it happen in my city, Jerusalem. So you see the separation of the 2 blocks. So those that are saved are the righteous, and they can't save anyone else. Even if the most righteous people they knew, Job, the 3 that he uses, Noah, Daniel, and Job, all known as being very righteous men to God. Noah, Daniel, and Job. We're told that to Daniel. Remember, Gabriel came to Daniel, and he says, hey, you're well esteemed with the Father. And Job, he was a friend of the Father. And Noah, he was the only one in that nation saved. These are great men. He's saying, even if these men were in this nation will be destroyed. And I believe he's telling us this is just one nation of many that will be destroyed. But in Israel also. So I wanted to show you this so you can start to get a little taste that we can start to see the differences in the block action and purposes and in the concrete. Plus, it ties in with Revelation. And it ties in with Revelation all over the place as you read through the book. But it can be a challenge. Yeah. There's a lot in Isaiah. Yep. So that's it for that study. I'm going to shut this down.